The day Daniel Brooks was about to lose everything, the daughter he believed had abandoned him walked into federal court, carrying the one thing no one else had been able to find: the truth. Daniel sat beside his attorney, Rachel Sloan, in a packed Columbus courtroom, while lawyers for Victor Hale argued that Brooks Community Logistics should remain under Victor's temporary control. On the screens behind them were bank transfers, executive approvals, and internal emails that appeared to prove Daniel had directed nearly $30 million into fraudulent vendors. Every document carried his name. Every digital authorization appeared to trace back to his credentials. Even several members of the company's board avoided looking at him. 15 years of work, more than 6,000 jobs, and the reputation Daniel had built from nothing were being reduced to records he had never created. Rachel challenged the evidence, but Victor's attorneys presented it with polished confidence. They described Daniel as a founder who had hidden behind the company's charitable mission while secretly draining its resources. Victor, once Daniel's closest friend and chief financial officer, sat only a few feet away, wearing the expression of a man reluctantly accepting responsibility. The judge warned that unless Rachel could provide credible evidence connecting someone else to the transactions, she was prepared to approve an emergency restructuring plan that would remove Daniel from all authority and permit the sale of 3 major distribution centers. Daniel lowered his eyes. He thought of the drivers already parked because their fuel cards had stopped working, the warehouse employees wondering whether their paychecks would clear, and his son, Eli, waiting outside the courtroom. Then the rear doors opened. Maya Bennett stepped inside wearing a dark navy suit and carrying a sealed evidence box. 2 independent forensic accountants working with federal investigators followed her. Daniel had not heard her voice in weeks. Newspapers had reported that his adopted daughter was cooperating with an investigation into Brooks Logistics, and every unanswered call had convinced him that she no longer trusted him. Maya walked past the reporters without taking her eyes off Victor. Rachel rose as Maya handed her the certified records. Victor's attorney immediately objected, arguing that the evidence had arrived too late. Rachel told the judge that copies had been delivered electronically to all parties 42 minutes earlier and that the records came from an independent archive maintained by the company's cyber insurance carrier. The judge reviewed the filing on her monitor, then looked toward Maya. "State your name and your connection to this matter." Maya faced the bench with a steadiness Daniel had not heard since she was a child. "My name is Maya Bennett. I am a forensic financial investigator, and Daniel Brooks is my father." Victor's attorney objected again, but the judge allowed her to continue. Maya finally turned toward Daniel. There was pain in her eyes, but no betrayal. "My father did not authorize those payments," she said. Then she looked past him, directly at Victor, and the person who did is still sitting in this courtroom. 15 years earlier, Daniel Brooks found Maya behind a warehouse with snow collecting on her sleeves and nowhere safe to go. It was late January, and Daniel was locking the loading dock of the small Columbus warehouse he rented for Brooks Community Logistics when he heard movement near a row of empty pallets. At first, he thought it was an animal searching for warmth. Then an 11-year-old girl stepped into the security light, thin, exhausted, and terrified that he would call the police and have her taken away. Daniel kept several feet between them, so he would not frighten her. He placed his coat on a nearby crate, offered her a bottle of water and the sandwich he had packed for the drive home, then sat on the cold pavement where she could see him. Her name was Maya Bennett. Her mother had died months earlier, and after moving between temporary relatives and emergency placements, she had run from an overcrowded shelter that morning. Daniel did not take her home or make promises he had no legal right to make. He called the county's emergency child services line and remained beside her until a caseworker arrived nearly 2 hours later. Before the car pulled away, Maya looked through the rear window and asked whether he would forget her. Daniel promised he would not. The following week, he contacted Harbor Path House, the licensed group home where she had been placed. Privacy rules prevented staff from sharing details, but the program manager, Helen Ward, explained how Daniel could register as an approved visitor. He completed the paperwork immediately. He returned the next Saturday with his 8-year-old son, Eli, 2 board games, and no speech about gratitude. Maya barely spoke during the first visit. During the second, she beat Eli at checkers and apologized for smiling. By the sixth, she was waiting near the front window before Daniel's truck entered the parking lot. Daniel kept showing up through background checks, parenting classes, financial reviews, home inspections, and interviews that forced him to explain why a widowed father already raising one child believed he could care for another. He never claimed that kindness made him ready. He treated every requirement as proof that Maya deserved more than good intentions. 7 months after the night behind the warehouse, she entered his home as a foster placement. She arrived with one duffel bag and kept it packed beside her bed for 3 weeks. She hid crackers in desk drawers, slept with the hallway light on, and apologized whenever she needed new shoes. One evening, after accidentally breaking a lamp, Maya stood trembling beside the shattered pieces and asked when she would have to leave. Daniel knelt in front of her. "Families do not throw people away when caring gets hard," he said. The adoption became final the following spring. Outside the courthouse, Daniel gave Maya a small silver key to the front door. Eli pointed out that she already had one, but Daniel told them this key meant something different. "Nobody gets left behind," he said. Maya carried those words for the next 15 years, never knowing that one day she would have to step away from Daniel in order to keep that promise. Brooks Community Logistics grew because Daniel built it around people other companies had learned to overlook. What began with 2 used trucks and a rented warehouse became a regional carrier, then a national logistics company serving manufacturers, hospitals, and grocery distributors across the Midwest and beyond. Daniel hired veterans rebuilding civilian careers, parents returning to work, former foster youth, and people trying to earn a second chance. The company's reputation was built not only on reliable deliveries, but on the belief that dignity could be part of a business model. Maya and Eli grew up inside that world. They did homework in a dispatch office, ate takeout dinners beside route maps, and learned the names of drivers who had watched the business expand. Maya became fascinated by the systems behind the operation, how invoices moved, how contracts were approved, and how a single unexplained number could reveal an entire story. Eli preferred the physical side of the company and spent summers helping warehouse teams and maintenance crews. As Brooks Logistics expanded, Daniel brought in Victor Hale, an old friend with an impressive financial background and a calm, disciplined manner. Victor helped secure credit, negotiate acquisitions, modernize the accounting system, and reassure lenders during years of rapid growth. Daniel gradually gave him authority over banking relationships, vendor approvals, finance staff, and internal audits. Victor became the executive everyone trusted to understand what Daniel no longer had time to examine personally. Years later, Maya earned a degree in forensic accounting and began investigating financial misconduct for private firms and government agencies. She also served without compensation on Brooks Logistics' Ethics Advisory Committee, preserving enough independence to question decisions without becoming part of daily management. During a routine review of the company's community investment fund, she noticed repeated payments to an organization called Harbor Path Outreach Services. The name was almost identical to Harbor Path House, the group home where Daniel had first visited her. At first, Maya assumed it was an affiliated nonprofit. Then she saw the total, more than $4 million paid over several years. The vendor file listed Daniel as the executive approver, but the address belonged to a virtual office. The phone number was disconnected, and the supporting contracts contained language copied from unrelated agreements. Maya searched the records she was authorized to review and found additional vendors with the same patterns: new entities, vague services, unusually high payments, and Daniel's approval attached to each transaction. The earliest suspicious vendor had entered the system 18 months after Victor received full control over vendor administration. Maya compared approval times with Daniel's public schedule. Several transactions had been authorized while he was speaking at conferences, attending recorded board meetings, or traveling without access to his registered devices. She stared at his electronic signature on the screen until one terrible possibility became unavoidable. Either her father had built his company on a lie, or someone had spent years constructing a perfect record designed to make the world believe he had. The first person to confirm that something was wrong was the woman who had once helped Maya find a home. Maya returned to Harbor Path House on a gray Tuesday morning and found Helen Ward sorting donated winter clothes in the same narrow office she remembered from childhood. Helen was older, but her voice still carried the same steady warmth. When Maya showed her the records for Harbor Path Outreach Services, Helen's expression changed. Harbor Path House had never created a separate business entity, never signed a consulting agreement with Brooks Logistics, and never received any portion of the millions of dollars recorded in the company's charitable accounts. Helen provided tax filings, banking records, and board minutes showing that the shelter had no connection to the vendor. Maya then traced the false organization through public registrations. Its address led to a rented mailbox. Its registered agent had resigned. Its listed director appeared to be fictitious. Several other suspicious vendors followed the same structure. Back in the Brooks Logistics system, Maya compared approval timestamps with Daniel's calendar and device logs. Some payments had been authorized while Daniel was delivering a keynote speech in Indianapolis. Others were approved while he was visible in recorded board meetings or traveling on flights during which his registered laptop remained offline. Someone had either stolen his credentials or used administrative privileges to imitate them. Maya quietly preserved only the records she was legally permitted to access and contacted Rachel Sloan, an independent restructuring attorney experienced in complex corporate fraud. Rachel reviewed the files and warned her that the pattern suggested more than theft. Someone appeared to be draining money from the company while constructing a complete digital history that blamed Daniel. Before they could act, Maya needed to understand who benefited. She requested a private meeting with her father and spread the vendor records across his conference table. Daniel listened carefully but hesitated when she urged him to authorize an immediate independent forensic audit. Brooks Logistics employed more than 6,000 people, carried significant debt, and depended on lender confidence. An outside investigation based on incomplete evidence could destabilize the company even if the concerns proved unfounded. Victor entered near the end of the meeting and offered a calm explanation. Rapid growth, he said, often created inconsistent vendor records. Some nonprofits operated through related business entities, and old contracts were frequently migrated imperfectly during system upgrades. He proposed a short internal review led by senior finance staff. Daniel did not dismiss Maya, but he agreed to let Victor's department examine the records before involving outsiders. Maya felt the trap closing. If Victor controlled the data, he would control the review. She gathered her documents, resigned from her unpaid advisory role, and walked toward the door. Daniel followed her into the hallway. "Why are you leaving when I need you to help me understand this?" he asked. Maya looked back at him with tears she refused to let fall. She could not reveal Rachel's strategy or warn him that his closest friend might be framing him. "Because if I stay," she said softly, "the truth may not survive." The hardest decision Maya ever made was the one that convinced Daniel she had chosen investigators over her own father. Rachel explained that confronting Victor before independent evidence had been preserved would give him time to erase records, alter audit trails, or accuse Maya of manipulating the system to protect Daniel. Maya therefore agreed to cooperate with outside forensic specialists under strict confidentiality. She could not warn Daniel, discuss investigative leads, or reveal that he was the person she was trying to clear. Within days, business reporters learned that Daniel's adopted daughter was assisting an inquiry into Brooks Logistics finances. The headlines implied betrayal before anyone understood the facts. Daniel called Maya 6 times during the first week. She listened to every voicemail and returned none of them. Each message hurt more than the last because he did not sound angry. He sounded confused. Rachel's team compared vendor records, bank transfers, email metadata, and public filings. They found a structure designed to survive ordinary audits. Fraudulent invoices were mixed with legitimate expenses. Payments were divided among multiple shell companies. Daniel's authorization templates had been inserted into approval chains that appeared routine. Then, before investigators could secure the company's full network, several banks froze Brooks Logistics operating accounts after receiving evidence of potentially fraudulent transfers. The restrictions took effect before sunrise. By mid-morning, dispatch managers in 7 states were calling headquarters because fuel cards were failing. Vendors demanded payment. Customers threatened to move contracts. Hundreds of trucks stopped moving while more than 6,000 employees wondered whether Friday's payroll would arrive. Victor entered an emergency board meeting carrying a prepared rescue plan. He displayed emails from Daniel's account, approval logs linked to Daniel's credentials, and meeting notes describing a confidential expansion fund Daniel supposedly controlled. Daniel recognized fragments of old conversations, but the documents had been rearranged to create instructions he had never given. Victor proposed that Daniel be suspended, that he assume temporary control, and that the board authorized negotiations with a private investment group offering emergency capital. The plan appeared to preserve payroll and operations. Buried inside it, however, was a provision allowing the investment group to purchase 3 major distribution centers at a steep discount if Brooks Logistics missed its next debt payment. Frightened directors approved Daniel's suspension. His access badge stopped working. His company email disappeared from his phone. He packed 15 years of photographs, awards, and handwritten employee notes into a cardboard box while staff watched through the glass walls of the executive floor. Eli met him in the parking garage and asked whether Maya had caused the investigation. Daniel could not answer. Across town, Maya watched Victor tell reporters that removing the founder was necessary because no one stood above accountability. In that moment, she understood that the fraud was not merely designed to steal money. It was designed to turn Victor into the hero who saved the company from Daniel. By the time Daniel understood the shape of the attack, Victor had already converted nearly every safeguard inside Brooks Logistics into evidence against him. Rachel obtained a copy of the proposed investment agreement from a concerned board member and found a consulting entity entitled to receive millions if the distribution centers changed ownership. That entity was linked to Victor's longtime business attorney. The stolen money had weakened Brooks Logistics. The forged approvals had framed Daniel. The emergency financing would allow Victor's allies to acquire the company's most valuable properties for a fraction of their market value. The motive was clear, but motive alone could not prove who had created the false vendors or used Daniel's credentials. Late one night, a forensic specialist uncovered device access records showing that every suspicious vendor account had originated from the same workstation, the computer once assigned to Victor's private office. For several hours, Maya believed they finally had enough. Then Victor's attorneys attacked the chain of custody. The workstation had been replaced 18 months earlier during a company-wide technology upgrade. Its digital image had passed through an outside contractor, the Internal Information Technology Department, and a storage vendor before reaching Rachel's team. Without sworn confirmation from the technician who first preserved it, the court could not be certain the data had remained unchanged. The judge did not call the evidence false, but she refused to rely on it during the emergency control proceedings. Rachel searched for the technician, Aaron Cole, only to discover that his number was disconnected and his former apartment was empty. His previous employer said he had moved out of Ohio without leaving a forwarding address. Meanwhile, the company's crisis deepened. Fuel access was restored only on priority routes. 2 major customers began considering other carriers. Lenders warned that they would start seizing collateral unless emergency financing arrived by Friday. Victor used every delay to strengthen his position. He offered Daniel a settlement under which Daniel would admit reckless oversight, surrender his voting control, and support the asset sale. In exchange, Victor promised to protect payroll for 90 days and refrain from pressing the board to refer additional allegations to prosecutors. Daniel read the agreement in the small home office where Maya had once completed school projects beside him. Eli stood in the doorway and begged him not to confess to something he had not done. Daniel thought about drivers with mortgages, warehouse workers buying medicine, and parents depending on Friday's paycheck. His name could survive disgrace. He was no longer sure the company could survive his innocence. Rachel warned that signing the agreement would make the sale nearly impossible to reverse, but when Daniel asked whether she could guarantee payroll, she could not. After she left, he placed the settlement beside his late wife's silver watch and decided he would sign the next morning. Across town, Maya refused to stop searching. She reviewed insurance policies, cybersecurity reports, and disaster recovery contracts until nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. Buried inside an annual risk assessment was a reference to an automatic server archive maintained by Brooks Logistics' cyber insurance carrier. Unlike the disputed workstation image, the archive had been created continuously by an independent system, time-stamped long before the investigation, and stored beyond Victor's control. Maya called Rachel and read the policy number aloud. After a long silence, Rachel said that archive could establish the entire chain. Daniel was less than 8 hours away from signing away his company. The evidence Victor believed he had buried had been recording him every night for 5 years. Rachel obtained an emergency preservation order and contacted the cyber insurance carrier before dawn. Its engineers confirmed that the archive automatically captured vendor creation, credential requests, administrative changes, and approval sequences across Brooks Logistics' financial network. No company employee could alter or delete the records without generating a separate entry. The carrier began preparing certified copies, preservation logs, and sworn declarations establishing how the system worked and how the data had been stored. Rachel reached Daniel before he signed the settlement and told him only that potentially decisive evidence had surfaced. He agreed to wait, though he no longer believed waiting could save the company. During the next several hours, the forensic team traced the suspicious activity through the archive. One entry showed Victor's administrative account copying Daniel's authorization template. Another showed new vendor profiles being created late at night from a workstation assigned to Victor's office. A third linked the fraudulent approval sequence to a biometric login registered in Victor's name. The data also preserved badge entries and office access logs that placed him inside headquarters when several transactions were created. Yet Rachel warned Maya that discovering evidence and getting it admitted were different battles. Victor's attorneys would argue that the archive was incomplete, misunderstood, or delivered too late. Every document had to be authenticated, every timestamp explained, and every gap closed before the emergency hearing. While the accountants prepared their declarations, Maya reviewed the transactions one final time. The money had passed through layered shell companies before reaching accounts connected to Victor's attorney and the investment group seeking the distribution centers. The pattern revealed not just theft but design. Weaken Brooks Logistics, frame Daniel, force a distressed sale, and profit from the assets after control changed hands. Maya thought of the night Daniel had found her behind the warehouse. He had not rescued her with a dramatic promise. He had simply stayed until the right people arrived and followed every legal step required to keep her safe. Now she had to do the same for him. She could not rush into court with evidence that might collapse under pressure. She had to protect it carefully enough to survive. Just after noon, the cyber insurance carrier transmitted its certified archive to the court, Rachel, and Victor's attorneys. 42 minutes later, Maya entered the courtroom carrying the sealed physical copies while 2 forensic accountants walked behind her. Daniel looked at her as though he could not decide whether seeing her made the pain better or worse. Victor's attorney rose before she reached the witness table and objected that the material was untimely. Rachel answered that the archive had been maintained independently for 5 years and that every party now possessed identical certified records. The judge recessed briefly to review the documentation. When she returned, she allowed Maya and the accountants to provide limited testimony on authenticity and relevance. Maya took the oath, looked toward the father who believed she had left him, and prepared to explain why her silence had been the only way to bring the truth safely into the room. The moment the first archived record appeared on the courtroom screen, Victor Hale realized the system he had manipulated had preserved a history he could not rewrite. Maya explained that the cyber insurance archive automatically recorded vendor creation, credential requests, administrative activity, and approval sequences within Brooks Logistics' financial network. The data had been captured nightly for 5 years, long before anyone suspected fraud, and stored on systems no Brooks employee could access without leaving an additional record. Rachel displayed the first entry. Victor's workstation had created Harbor Path outreach services at 11:42 p.m. on a Sunday when Daniel was speaking at a workforce conference in Indianapolis, nearly 200 miles away. The next entry showed Victor's administrative account copying Daniel's executive authorization template. A third showed that template being used to approve payments while Daniel was visible in a recorded board meeting. Transaction records then traced the money through several shell companies before it reached accounts associated with Victor's longtime attorney and the investment group preparing to purchase the distribution centers. Victor's lawyer argued that another employee could have used his computer, but Rachel produced badge records, office access logs, and a biometric login tied directly to Victor. The evidence did not rely on a single file. It formed a continuous sequence. Helen Ward then testified that Harbor Path House had never received the money, had never created Harbor Path outreach services, and had never authorized anyone to use its name. As the pattern unfolded, Daniel finally understood what Maya had done. If she had remained inside the company, warned him about every step, or shared confidential evidence with him, Victor's attorneys could have portrayed the investigation as a family effort to protect the founder. Her resignation had preserved her independence. Her unanswered calls had protected the case. Her silence had not been abandonment. It had been sacrifice. When Victor was asked to explain the archive, his composure finally broke. He claimed the records were being misunderstood, blamed unnamed finance employees, and contradicted statements his lawyers had made only hours earlier. Rachel then connected the fraud to the emergency sale. The stolen funds had weakened the company. The false approvals had framed Daniel. The investment agreement would have transferred Brooks Logistics' most valuable properties to Victor's allies at a fraction of their worth, while a consulting entity connected to his attorney collected millions. The judge removed Victor from temporary control, blocked the asset sale, and referred the evidence to federal prosecutors for further investigation. A quiet breath moved through the courtroom as Daniel's name was separated from the fraud. He looked at Maya, but neither of them spoke. Too much had happened for a single glance to repair. Then the lender's attorney stood and delivered the final warning. Clearing Daniel's name did not restore $30 million, restart hundreds of trucks, or guarantee Friday's payroll. Brooks Community Logistics had been saved from Victor, but the company remained only days away from collapse. The company survived because Daniel finally understood that being innocent of fraud did not make him innocent of every failure. Within 24 hours of the ruling, he gathered the board, lenders, employee representatives, and Rachel inside the same conference room where he had been suspended. He spoke before anyone else could. He had not stolen from Brooks Logistics, but he had trusted one executive with too much authority and allowed the company to outgrow its safeguards. Good intentions, he said, did not excuse weak oversight. Rachel presented a restructuring plan negotiated through the night. Non-essential real estate would be sold instead of the 3 critical distribution centers. The company would pursue insurance recoveries and assets frozen in connection with the shell companies. Lenders would extend emergency operating credit under strict, independent supervision. A permanent ethics committee would oversee executive approvals, vendor registrations, charitable investments, and major related party transactions. Daniel accepted every condition without negotiation. He surprised the board by voluntarily surrendering his controlling voting power in exchange for preserving the company's future. Brooks Logistics, he explained, did not belong to one man. It belonged to every driver who missed family birthdays to deliver freight, every warehouse employee who worked through winter storms, and every household depending on an honest paycheck. 1 week later, restored payroll reached employee accounts. Trucks returned to the highways. Customers renewed contracts after independent auditors confirmed the reforms. Federal prosecutors later charged Victor Hale and several associates in connection with the shell company network and attempted asset sale. The legal process would continue, But the scheme that nearly destroyed Brooks Logistics had ended. On a quiet afternoon after Operation stabilized, Daniel drove to Harbor Path House, carrying school supplies and winter coats. Helen Ward greeted him while children ran through the hallway, much as Maya once had. Maya arrived a few minutes later, uncertain whether the unanswered calls still stood between them. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms without speaking. When he finally stepped back, he thanked her for protecting the truth, even when doing so cost her his trust. Maya apologized for every night she had wanted to answer the phone, but could not. Daniel shook his head. 15 years ago, I promised that no one in this family would be left behind when caring became hard, he said softly. I almost forgot that sometimes protecting someone means carrying a burden they cannot understand. Months later, Brooks Community Logistics created a scholarship and apprenticeship program for young adults leaving foster care, funded through its Restored Community Foundation under independent oversight. Maya declined every suggestion that she become the next chief executive. Instead, she agreed to chair the ethics committee, believing the strongest leaders were often those willing to stand outside the spotlight. Watching employees fill the warehouse again, Daniel understood that the company's greatest asset had never been its trucks, buildings, or contracts. It was people willing to choose integrity over convenience. 15 years earlier, a frightened girl had entered his life carrying nothing but a packed duffel bag and the fear of being forgotten. 15 years later, she had walked into a courtroom carrying the truth that saved everything he had spent a lifetime building.